I want to ask you something that might challenge what you've always believed about falls. If I asked you right now what causes most falls after 60, you'd probably say balance. Maybe you'd mention a rug that slipped, a wet floor, poor lighting, or just feeling a little unsteady on your feet. And all of those things absolutely play a role. But I want to tell you something that almost nobody explains clearly, something that completely changes how you should be thinking about fall prevention. Balance is not actually the primary reason most falls happen. It's the thing that gets blamed, because it's the thing people notice in the moment right before they go down. But underneath that wobble, underneath that stumble, there's almost always a different, more fundamental issue at work. And it's one that very few people are ever told to address directly. Today, I'm going to walk you through what's actually happening in your body in the seconds before a fall, why balance training alone often isn't enough to prevent it, what the real underlying factor usually is, and exactly what you can do about it starting today. I want to be clear from the start, this isn't about dismissing balance exercises, which absolutely have value. It's about understanding the piece that's usually missing entirely from the conversation, the piece that, once addressed, makes balance training itself far more effective. My name is Dr. William. I've spent years in preventive health, and fall prevention is one of the topics I take most seriously because a single fall can genuinely change the entire trajectory of someone's independence, sometimes permanently. And one pattern shows up constantly in my own practice. People do balance exercises diligently, standing on one foot, practicing heel-to-toe walking, and still fall. Because balance exercises alone were never addressing the actual root cause sitting underneath their instability. I want to explain why getting this distinction right matters so much. Falls remain one of the leading causes of serious injury and loss of independence for adults over 60, and a huge amount of public health messaging, well-intentioned as it is, focuses almost entirely on environmental factors and balance, while largely overlooking the muscular strength and speed component that actually determines whether a stumble turns into a catastrophic fall or simply a brief scare you walk away from. Closing this gap in understanding isn't just an interesting detail, it directly shapes which prevention strategies are actually likely to work for you. Before we get into it, drop a comment and tell me whether you, or someone you love, has had a fall or a near fall in the past year. I read every comment, and it helps me understand exactly who's watching and what to cover next. Let's talk about what's actually happening in the moment right before most falls occur, because understanding this mechanism changes everything about how you should approach prevention. When you trip, stumble, or lose your footing even slightly, your body has an incredibly short window, often less than half a second, to recover before gravity takes over completely. In that brief window, your nervous system sends an emergency signal to specific muscles, primarily in your legs, hips, and core, telling them to fire immediately and powerfully enough to catch your weight, adjust your foot placement, or push your body back toward a stable position. This rapid, forceful muscular response is what actually prevents a stumble from becoming a fall. Balance, in the way most people think about it, the sense of steadiness and spatial awareness, is what detects that you're off-center. But detecting the problem and actually correcting it are two completely different things, and the correction depends almost entirely on whether your muscles can generate enough force, quickly enough, to respond to that signal. This is the piece that gets missed constantly. You can have excellent balance, in the sense of knowing exactly that you're off-center and exactly which direction you need to move to correct it, and still fall, simply because your legs and hips don't have the strength and power to execute that correction in time. This is exactly why so many people who practice balance exercises diligently, standing on one foot, walking heel to toe, still experience falls. They've trained the detection system without adequately training the muscular response system that actually has to act on that detection within a fraction of a second. Research has consistently shown that leg strength, and specifically a quality called muscle power, which is strength combined with speed, is one of the strongest predictors of fall risk in older adults, often a stronger predictor than standard balance test scores alone. This makes complete sense once you understand the mechanism. A fall isn't really a balance failure in the way we typically describe it. It's usually a strength and speed failure happening in the half-second window where your body desperately needs your legs to respond and simply doesn't have the power available to do so in time. I want to be specific about why power, not just raw strength, matters so much here. You can have reasonably strong legs in a slow, controlled sense, able to lift a heavy weight given enough time, but still struggle in a fall recovery situation if those same muscles can't generate that force quickly. Falls happen fast. The recovery has to happen just as fast, which is why training specifically for quick, controlled muscle activation, not just slow strength building, tends to be the most directly relevant kind of training for actual fall prevention. I want to tell you about a patient I'll call Frank, 74, who had been doing balance exercises faithfully for over a year after a minor stumble had scared him into taking his fall risk seriously. He could stand on one foot for an impressively long time and felt confident in his balance overall. Despite this, he had a near fall stepping off a curb that he described as happening too fast to even think about. When we tested his leg strength, and specifically his ability to rise quickly from a chair, a clear gap emerged. His balance was genuinely good, but his legs simply weren't generating enough force quickly enough to execute the kind of rapid correction a near fall demands. We added targeted strength and power work, specifically focused on controlled but reasonably quick chair-rising movements, alongside his existing balance practice. Several months later, he described a similar stumbling moment on an uneven sidewalk, and this time he caught himself completely, describing his leg as simply being there in a way it hadn't been before. A second story. Dorothy, 79, had actually fallen twice in the previous year, both times describing the sensation as her legs simply giving out, rather than feeling like a true loss of balance in the way she'd always imagined a fall would feel. This description is actually a meaningful clue, because it points much more directly toward a strength and power issue than a pure balance issue. When we assessed her specifically, her leg strength was notably reduced, likely related to a long period of reduced activity following a hospitalization a couple of years earlier that she'd never fully recovered from afterward. A structured strength program, built up very gradually given her starting point, led to a substantial improvement over about 6 months, and she went the following year without a single fall, something her family noted with visible relief during one of her follow-up visits. A third, shorter story. Walter, 69, had no history of falls at all, but came in specifically because his father had experienced a serious fall-related injury in his 80s, and Walter wanted to be proactive rather than waiting for a problem to develop. We assessed both his balance and his leg power directly, and while his balance tested well, his leg power was on the lower end of typical for his age. Rather than waiting for a scare to prompt action, he started a simple, preventive strength routine specifically designed to build the kind of quick, responsive leg strength that matters most for fall recovery, well before any actual incident had occurred. A fourth story worth sharing, because it illustrates how this can be missed even by well-meaning caregivers. Helen, 81, had been enrolled by her daughter in a balance-focused class at a local community center, attending faithfully twice a week for nearly a year. She felt more confident in her balance during the structured class exercises, but had a fall at home reaching for something on a slightly elevated shelf, a movement that required a brief, powerful push from her legs to maintain her position that her balance training had never specifically addressed. When we discussed what had happened, it became clear that her class, while valuable, had focused almost entirely on static balance and slow, controlled movement, without any component specifically building the quicker, more forceful leg response needed for moments like reaching, twisting, or recovering from an unexpected shift in weight. Adding targeted strength and power work alongside her existing class gave her a more complete foundation than either piece could provide alone. I want to explain why this gap between balance and strength happens so often as we age, because understanding the biology helps explain why balance training alone frequently isn't enough. As we get older, our bodies naturally lose muscle mass and strength if that muscle isn't actively challenged, a process called sarcopenia. But there's a second, less commonly discussed piece happening alongside it. We also tend to lose what's specifically called fast-twitch muscle fiber more readily than slow-twitch fiber. Fast-twitch fibers are the ones responsible for quick, powerful, explosive movements, exactly the kind needed in that critical half-second fall recovery window, while slow-twitch fibers are more suited to sustained, lower-intensity activity like walking or standing for long periods. This means that even someone who remains reasonably active through walking and daily movement can still experience a disproportionate loss of exactly the kind of fast, powerful muscle response that fall recovery depends on most, simply because walking doesn't specifically challenge or maintain that fast twitch capacity. This is exactly why the fix isn't simply more balance practice or even more general activity. It's specifically training your legs and hips to produce force quickly and powerfully in a safe, controlled way, which is a different kind of training than either pure balance work or low-intensity daily walking provides on its own. Here's what I want you to do this week. First, assess your own starting point honestly. Can you rise from a chair without using your hands? And does it feel slow and effortful, or relatively quick and controlled? This simple self-check gives you a rough sense of where you currently stand with the specific quality we're discussing today. Second, begin practicing controlled sit-to-stand repetitions daily, focusing not just on completing the movement, but on standing up with reasonable controlled speed rather than the slowest possible pace, since training some speed into the movement is specifically what builds the power quality that matters most for fall recovery. Third, once basic sit-to-stand feels comfortable, add a slightly more dynamic variation, standing up just a bit more briskly while remaining fully controlled and safe, always with a sturdy chair or counter nearby for support if needed. Fourth, continue any balance practice you're already doing, since it remains valuable for the detection half of the equation we discussed earlier. Just understand that it's addressing a different piece of the puzzle than strength and power work does, and both pieces genuinely matter together rather than one replacing the other. Fifth, if you have any significant joint pain, a recent fall with injury, or other health conditions that make you nervous about starting this kind of practice on your own, talk with your doctor or a physical therapist first, since they can tailor an appropriate starting point and progression specifically to your situation. Sixth, take a moment to walk through your own home, specifically thinking about movements that require a quick, powerful response. Reaching up to a shelf, twisting to grab something behind you, stepping quickly to catch a falling object, and consider practicing safer, slower versions of those exact movements as part of building confidence alongside your strength work, since real-world fall risk often hides in these specific, everyday moments rather than purely in walking itself. Seventh, if you've had a recent fall or near fall, don't dismiss it as simply bad luck or a one-time accident. Treat it specifically as useful information about where your current strength and power level stands, and use it as the starting point for exactly the kind of targeted work we've discussed today, rather than something to feel embarrassed about or quietly hope doesn't happen again without addressing the underlying cause. A few terms worth being clear on, since understanding them helps you think about this topic more precisely going forward. Muscle power refers specifically to the combination of strength and speed, your ability to generate force quickly rather than just eventually. Fast-twitch muscle fiber is the specific type of muscle tissue responsible for quick, powerful movements, and it tends to decline more readily with age and inactivity than slower, more endurance-oriented muscle fiber. And sarcopenia is the broader medical term for age-related muscle loss that, left unaddressed, underlies much of what we've discussed today. A common question I hear at this point: isn't practicing quicker movements actually more dangerous for someone already worried about falling? This is a completely understandable concern, but the practice itself is designed to be safe, specifically because you control the entire movement, with a sturdy chair always right behind you, and the option to use your hands for support at any point if needed. You're not practicing in an unstable, unpredictable real-world situation. You're building the underlying strength and speed capacity in the safest possible controlled environment, so that capacity is available if you ever do need it during an actual unexpected moment. Another question that comes up often: how long does it typically take to notice a real difference in this kind of strength and power? Many people notice some improvement in how their legs feel during everyday movements, getting out of a car, climbing stairs, within a few weeks of consistent practice, though more substantial, measurable changes in strength and power typically take a couple of months of regular effort to develop fully. This is similar to the timeline we'd expect with most strength training, and it's worth sticking with consistently, even before you notice dramatic changes, since the underlying physiological adaptations are happening gradually, even when they're not yet obvious in daily life. A third question worth answering: is there a way to actually measure this leg power quality directly, rather than just guessing based on how things feel? Yes, and one simple, accessible way is timing how quickly you can complete 5 sit-to-stand repetitions repetitions in a row, rather than simply counting how many you can do in 30 seconds. A noticeably slow time relative to others your age can be a useful additional data point alongside the strength itself, since it specifically captures the speed component that matters so much for fall recovery, distinct from pure strength or endurance. A fourth question I hear occasionally: does this mean balance exercises were a waste of time if strength is really the bigger piece? Not at all. Balance exercises improve your ability to detect that you're off-center and to make smaller, ongoing postural adjustments throughout daily movement, which remains genuinely valuable. The key insight isn't that balance doesn't matter. It's that balance training without adequate strength and power training leaves a critical gap in the overall system, since detecting a problem and having the physical capacity to correct it are two separate things that both need to be trained for genuinely comprehensive fall prevention. A fifth question worth addressing: are certain medications also worth considering alongside this strength and power picture, since fall risk seems to involve so many factors at once? Yes, and this is worth mentioning specifically. Several medications discussed in other videos on this channel, including certain sleep aids, blood pressure medications, and sedating medications more broadly, can independently increase fall risk through dizziness, lightheadedness, or slowed reaction time, layered on top of whatever strength and power picture exists underneath. If you're working on the strength component we've discussed today, it's also worth a broader medication review with your doctor or pharmacist, since fall risk is rarely caused by just one single factor in isolation. A sixth question that comes up: is there a specific age where this kind of power-focused strength training becomes most important to start? Or is it ever too late to begin? There's genuinely no age where it becomes too late to start. And in fact, some of the most meaningful improvements I've seen have come from people starting in their late 70s or 80s, often after a fall had already occurred. While starting earlier, ideally before any fall happens at all, gives you more of a protective buffer. The muscle and nervous system adaptations this kind of training produces remain available at essentially any age, which is part of why this isn't a message reserved only for people who haven't had a fall yet. I want to leave you with one final thought. For years, fall prevention conversations have centered almost entirely around balance, careful walking, removing rugs, improving lighting, all of which matter, and all of which I'd encourage anyone to continue doing. But underneath all of that sits a more fundamental piece that rarely gets the attention it deserves: the actual strength and speed in your legs and hips that determines whether your body can act on what your balance system detects, in that critical fraction of a second that separates a stumble from a fall. Addressing that piece directly, alongside everything else you're already doing, closes a gap that balance training alone simply can't close on its own. I also want to acknowledge that fear of falling itself can become its own quiet problem, separate from the physical risk we've discussed today. Many people, often without fully realizing it, begin limiting their own movement out of caution after a scare, avoiding stairs, avoiding uneven ground, avoiding activities they used to enjoy. This caution feels protective in the moment, but it often accelerates exactly the muscle loss that increases fall risk in the first place, creating a quiet, self-reinforcing cycle. Building real strength and power isn't just about preventing the next fall directly. It's about giving yourself enough genuine confidence in your own body that you don't need to shrink your world out of fear, which is its own meaningful piece of healthy, independent aging. If this changed how you think about your own fall risk, hit subscribe, because that's exactly what this channel exists to do. And if you know someone who's been diligently practicing balance exercises and still feels nervous about falling, send this to them. It might be the missing piece they've been looking for. I'll see you in the next one.